on paper. Thank you very much. My question is for Professor Henry. I'm curious whether I really enjoyed the expansion of winter, and then I've been looking at the transition of her ideas through her work. But I'm curious to hear more about something you said towards the end of your talk about the development, her call for a science of signs that would be analogous to the way in which other sciences intervene into nature. This would be an intervention into culture. And I'm wondering whether you could say more about that analogy between the intervention into nature and intervention into culture, and how that science would manifest and what it might look like.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure how much I can say, since we find this idea at the end, only at the end of Winter's papers. Every paper by Sylvia Winter is 100 pages. I mean, every one. 120. Yeah. It's like the last 2 paragraphs, the last 3 paragraphs. She talks about the science of science, the science of the word. So I can just only guess at what she's, hinting at. The idea that epistemes are autopoetically instituted, this is the problem, right? Now, because they're instituted, pre-reflectively, right? Her idea, I think, is that if we are going to be able to somehow counter processes of othering, let's say, right? It means that we have to understand, right, very objectively, how this process of autopoetic institution operates. So she thinks, right, that only by being able to look at that process objectively, to see, as I said, she thinks of this as a distinct domain of immanence. It operates with its own laws, just like you've got the subatomic realm, and if you're going to do subatomic physics, you can't use Newtonian physics. You got to do something else, right? So she's saying, the techniques that you use to sort of analyze a play, any kind of conscious creation, these can easily be analyzed. We know how to do that, you see? But it is this autopoetic, pre-reflective instituting, you see, of identities, epistemes, and so forth. She said, we really don't know how to do that, you see? And so sometimes she'll talk about a transcultural approach to culture. It's another way she formulates this. In other words, then, you must be able to step out of your own culture if you're going to understand the entire cultural process, right? But exactly how she's going to do this, she's never really said. So that's the best I can do.
I have a little question for Nancy. It's very quick. I read The Second Sex many, many years ago, and I must admit there are many passages, details I do not remember. You pointed out many passages, details I do not remember. You pointed out that at one point Beauvoir declares that women would probably be happier if they remain within the old norm, the old structure, and that trying to get liberated, etc., may not be the happiest possible choice. Now, does she at all suggest that for some women, at least, this liberation process might bring some kind of intellectual fulfillment that is really worth trying and worthwhile? I don't remember.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. Did people hear the question in the back? Yes? No. The question is basically, I made a claim that Beauvoir, the way to put it, recognizes, she doesn't sort of make a claim herself, I make a claim, that it's much easier, it's easier is the wrong word, that it's no wonder that women settle for the kind of what I think she thinks is attenuated happiness that's possible in this world, because it's very hard to leave that behind for an unknown future that may bring nothing, especially if you're trying to do this with no socio-political change going on, which she thought was absolutely critical. And so I think what the job of this, so the question is, does she ever talk about liberation, right? Is this the
Bringing about some sort of intellectual fulfillment.
Right.
Intellectual
Right.
fulfillment.
With
So
whether-
some women, at least who could, of course, go to
Right.
school, etc.
So whether you could get intellectual fulfillment
and that
through
is
some,
worthwhile.
that would be worthwhile through a kind of philosophizing or of
No,
a
liberation,
change.
but it is still worth trying, abandon the old structure, because you said that she says that be careful, maybe you'll be even more miserable than you are if you try what I'm suggesting, liberating
But will you at least get
yourself.
intellectual
Now, what
fulfillment?
about the intellectual process, which perhaps will be achieved if we liberate ourselves? You see
Yes.
what I mean?
Yes.
For some women at least, because for...
I mean, she certainly thinks that what she's trying to do is to show people the extent to which the happiness that's available in the present system is so attenuated that the way I like to put it is that the attractions of freedom outweigh the fear of giving that attenuated happiness up. What I like about it is it's not moralistic, it's not preachy, I don't think. It's instead trying to paint a picture of the world such that induces a desire for freedom in the reader, and while at the same time not pretending that there are certain rewards to going along with the system the way it is now. If there weren't, it wouldn't be so intractable, right? Yes, I think she definitely thinks that there are intellectual rewards.
But she suggested in words, clear words.
Well, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I
I'm
don't
not
know.
saying I don't think she's going to use the terms that I just said. In other places, I've written extensively about this where I try to show in great detail why I think she holds that view. That is to say, the view that rather, I mean, a lot of philosophy, right, just sort of says, here's how things are, and that's really bad, maybe even describes it to some extent, and says we shouldn't do it that way, we should do it this way. This way's bad, this way's better. And it gives reasons, and there's a long story to be there, but still it's not persuasive at the level that one might need to make an utter change in one's life. And one of the things I was trying to talk about when I was bringing up Hipparchia and also Nora Helmer of A Doll's House is that various things can make you just decide, that's it, I can't do this anymore. And I think the second text has the capacity to do that, but in a way that is, I mean, in the case of Hipparchia, it's actually exciting because she's going off with this man, and even though it ended up being very dangerous for her, actually. But in the case of Nora, she's just got this wide open world with no idea of what's going to happen. And what I'm suggesting is that Simone de Beauvoir literally encourages people, puts courage in people to try it another way. And she seems like a friend who's kind of there with you. I mean, not everybody reads it this way, but I think she does. I'm not sure if that is responsive to you. And I do think, of course, the voice of Simone de Beauvoir, even in its more obnoxious moments, and it has its obnoxious moments, is such a powerful woman's voice that in and of itself has a kind of seduction and powers of encouragement as well.
I realize.
Thank you.
I got a question for Robert, just to put him on the spot again. What can I say? I never thought of that. I thought that was brilliant. That Beauvoir, by presenting herself, I mean, when I read the plot, I saw her as making in America Day by Day the figure Simone de Beauvoir as voicing first nominalism and then essentialism, and then working, through the guidance of Richard Wright into this more lived experience of race. But I didn't understand the point you made about the power of sucking people in who in fact agreed with those positions, and then having her experience, describe her own experience of being wrong. So instead of preaching a purist kind of thing, I wondered, does she construct Richard Wright the way she constructs. I mean, she is a construct in that story. Is Richard Wright a construct?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't see why he. I mean, I don't see how he could not be, in a sense, because always you have to make these choices about what you include, what you don't include, how you emphasize it. So yes, he obviously, at some level, must be a construct. But I think the power of saying that I only was able to transform myself to the extent that I heard it from someone else, that it came from the outside. It wasn't self-discovery. It was this indirect demonstration, but you know, and it, because we know Richard Wright goes on to write a book called White Man Listen. And so, you know, if I was to retitle my paper Richard Wright Educator, the subtitle would be White Woman Listen, because that seems to me to be what she's saying now. And to the extent that it has that level of clarity, it has to be, I think, a construct, because in the real world, everything is so ambiguous and unclear, and nobody knows that better than she does. And so then the difficulty of, well, what is genuine personal transformation and what is purification, the difference between what is genuine appreciation and what is the exoticization, all of these things are not clearly given and decidable. And I think that, again, that is the strength of the way she presents it in this book. So, I mean, I'm recommending my reading because I do think it strengthens the power of the book for us today. But the real test is to what extent other people can read it and say, yes, that's exactly how it operates, I think.
This question is for Mireille Fanon-Mendès-France. I'm wondering, I'm not sure if you were suggesting this, I'm not sure if it matters really, but I'm curious whether you consider Achille Mbembe to be an existential thinker. Would you consider?
Achille Mbembe?
Yes.
Oh, for me, no. Maybe it should be before, but now, no, definitely not.
Could you say a bit more about that and why?
I actually had a conversation with him in Branchtown, where he said he is. Yeah.
As he becomes more familiar.
There are quite a few Coil Western used to call itself, but it was obvious, and then he said he is.
It changed radically. It changed, I think, it changed after the sortir de la grande nuit, come out from the dark night. It changed, I think, and he's more focused now on the issue of Africa. And for me, he is radical now. It is what I love him now.
He's unworthy of love.
Yeah, he is. I think you agree with me.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
No, not you, but also you, but you're from South Africa.
Oh, me, yeah.
And the last book, Critique de la raison nègre, I don't know if it's right translated.
Not
In English, not yet.
Critique of Black Reason.
It is absolutely the proof of his radical position. And for me now, it's anymore. But I was very interested because in the list on the website of the CPS there was a list of some existentialists, and he was in it, and some of you too, Nelson Maldonado Torres, and I was very surprised.
I think the answer to that, is it okay?
Yeah,
The answer to that is, it was meant to provoke people to understand that existentialism is not asocial. It's been stereotyped primarily through the United States as a kind of individualized libertarianism, which wouldn't explain why so many existentialists were Marxists. Where, so if you look at the critique of dialectical reason, which, for instance, Mbembe is imitating in its formulations, and not only there, but almost all black existentialists I look at, you can't be taking on black issues without taking the social world seriously. So every black existentialist is a very socially steeped person who takes seriously the paradox that although there's an over-determining social reality, there's simultaneously the problem of responsibility and the problems of agency. For instance, even in the formulation that Paget made about autopoiesis, the fundamental problem there's a problem of agency.
Oh, sure. And the thing I didn't get a chance to mention is that when Winter talks about, I was going to say, one thing I didn't get to mention was that when Winter talks about a project, and she does talk about project, it's a collective project. She's not focused on an I, she's focused on a we. And the opposition is a we-they opposition. And so this notion of a public self, a collective self, and how does that differ from the individual self? Do we analyze the public self, the we self, in the same terms that we analyze I, the I self, things like that? Those are some of the key things also in the things. There's very much, I really should have said that you don't get this focus on the individual in Winter, but it's on the we, not the other.
I have a question about this we is the utopic.
Well, all I can say is the we for her is the colonized black. That she's talking about, okay, this is the group I want to help to rehumanize, right? And she feels herself a part of that. So she's not saying they, she's saying we. So it is a kind of out of a sense of a solidarity, kind of a bonding.
Solidarity, okay.
Yeah.
Good question.
Oh, you're right behind the pillar, I can't see.
My question is for Professor Bernasconi. Could you compare what you just said about Simone de Beauvoir with Frantz Fanon's 6th chapter in Black Skin, White Mask? Because in the Negro Encyclopathology, he says some of the same things. He says that when we look at the origins of anti-black racism, we look at white exoticism of blacks, we look at white guilt in regards to the treatment of blacks. But when he discusses it, he doesn't cite Simone de Beauvoir. He goes to Gershon Legman and the translation of an article of his that appeared in La Temps Moderne. He goes to Bernard's book. And so we say the same things, different citations, and his explanation is the same, but he kind of comes out with different ways in terms of how it should be addressed. So could you talk about that, please?
I always have trouble with these questions with asking me to talk about things because I'm not sure what you're really asking for. But I entirely, obviously, we've all, probably half the people in this room have written articles about, Fanon's critique of Sartre in relation between chapter 5 and chapter 6. But I think that what happens is that in chapter 6 of Black Skin, White Masks, some of the points that he rejects when Sartre says them, he accepts when Aimé Césaire says them, for example. And it seems to me that that, again, is the important aspect of who you're going to listen to, who you allow to have the privileged voice. And this is obviously what complicates this whole issue of attraction and exoticization and envy and so on and so forth, because it can get mixed up with that. But if I'm missing the point you're asking me to make, I do think that Fanon's choice of sources there, the indications of who he wants to bring to the table as the voices that are legitimated and authorized, is intended to teach us something about how we examine these issues in a chapter which is basically saying, well, you know, what is white psychoanalysis going to say about black people? That's the point of the chapter, right?
There's a last question.
Yeah, I have a question for Nancy. So you offer, I guess, an interpretation of Beauvoir that privileges the description of lived experience and describes the capacity to affect a kind of gestalt shift in seeing what possibilities may be offered to women in the second sex. And when I read the second sex, I have tended to sort of emphasize both the existentialist and the phenomenological aspects of the text equally or not even reflected upon which we should assign a primary weight to. And I took your argument today for assigning a primary weight to the lived experience component to be the effect that Beauvoir has had on women as kind of testimony to the fact that we should emphasize the lived experience component and its capacity to affect this gestalt shift. Is that the claim that's being made?
Good enough, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering why we should take the legacy of the text as a means to measure how we should read the second sex.
Oh, well, I didn't mean to be suggesting that we should take the legacy of the text as a guidepost to how to read it. I think people can read it any way they want to read it. What I'm saying is that I find that what's groundbreaking and brilliant about that book, why that book has had more of an effect than any book I know of on changing women's lives around the world in many different circumstances, is because people can resonate with the stories that she tells about women's lives, whether or not they are gripped by the metaphysics, let's say, that lies behind it. And so I'm just taking that as a piece of, as a datum that I find very valuable and powerful as I think, which you know I think about a lot, about what it is that we're doing as philosophers and what our value is in the world. And it seems to me that, you know, many philosophers I know, and myself included, really want to have an effect on the world, or want to do something, want to use philosophy for activist purposes and make the world a better place, not just describe it. Many philosophers want to just describe it, that's fine. And it just seems to me that this book stands as a model for somebody thinking about how to hold their personal commitments and their philosophical commitments in the same place. And I just think that the narrative sections of the second sex are the ones that people find the most memorable. And I could be wrong about that. But, so yeah, I don't mean what I'm saying to be normative about how to read the book.
Robert, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a follow-up question about de Beauvoir and Fanon.
Okay.
Are you saying, I mean, there's many references to Sartre in Black Skin, White Mask, and there aren't any to de Beauvoir. But there are resonances of de Beauvoir in Black Skin, White Mask. Are you saying that Fanon makes a decision not to cite de Beauvoir in Black Skin, White Mask?
Certainly, I didn't say that, and I wouldn't say that. But I think that the sort of question of the resonances is difficult because, although there are, you know, possible resonances, they're never. I've not seen one which is so definitive that enables me to say. I mean, I did hear a paper in this conference. I've heard so many papers in this conference, I no longer remember which paper, where somebody did make precisely this argument about a given passage within.
I did.
You did. There you go. You may not be the only person who did, though. But yeah.
If I could, and German, there is you participate to this review.
Actual marks.
Actual marks, and there is a paper, Mathieu Renaud papers on that, on the l'oubli, the forgiveness, forgetting, to quote Simone de Beauvoir by Fanon. It's absolutely on this issue.
given that, I will wait until I...
You have to read it.
So before asking you to join me in thanking our entire panelists, I wanted to just make